A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. This is episode 938, and I am coming to you from a very tense Jerusalem. I am here with my brother, as always, and the atmosphere outside is unlike anything I have ever experienced.
Herman Poppleberry here. And you are right, Corn, the air in the Middle East right now is thick. Usually, our housemate Daniel sends us a specific audio prompt to chew on, something quirky or abstract, but we decided to take the reins ourselves for this one. Given what has been unfolding over the last week, we felt like we had to dive into the mechanics of leadership at the highest levels. We are not just talking about politics, we are talking about the actual hands on the steering wheel of a global conflict.
Yeah, it is impossible to ignore. We are currently watching the largest combat operation since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28th, and as we sit here on March 5th, the scale of it is just staggering. Over 1,700 targets struck in the first 72 hours. We are talking about 50,000 troops, 2 aircraft carriers, stealth bombers. It is massive, and it is happening in real time all around us.
And at the center of that entire whirlwind is one man, Admiral Brad Cooper. He is the commander of United States Central Command, or CENTCOM. I think most people see the headlines and they imagine this Hollywood version of a general or an admiral. You know, the guy standing over a glowing digital map in a dark bunker, picking up a red phone and saying, "Launch the missiles." There is this myth of the golden phone or the red phone, where a single person is micromanaging every explosion.
Right. The decisive hero who is personally directing every squad and every pilot. But the reality of what a 4-star combatant commander actually does day to day is so much more complex, and frankly, more like being a global chief executive officer than a tactical commander. I wanted us to really pull back the curtain on that today. What does top brass actually do when they are not just in conference calls? How many layers are there between the president and the actual soldier on the ground? And does a guy like Admiral Cooper still have to be able to pass a fitness test or fire a rifle?
Those are the exact questions we need to answer to demystify this. And I think the best place to start is with the structural authority itself, because the legal framework is what actually defines the job. Most people get the chain of command wrong immediately. They think the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is currently General Dan Kane, is the guy who commands the troops. They see him standing next to the president in the Oval Office and assume he is the boss of the military.
But he is not, right? That is a huge misconception that I think even some news anchors get wrong.
It is a total misconception. Thanks to the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is an advisor. He is the principal military advisor to the President, the National Security Council, and the Secretary of Defense, but he has no operational command authority. He cannot order a single soldier to move. The actual chain goes from the President to the Secretary of Defense, who is currently Pete Hegseth, and then straight to the combatant commanders like Admiral Cooper. That is it. That is the operational line.
So Cooper is essentially the king of his theater. He is the one who actually owns the mission and the consequences.
He is the CEO of a theater of war that covers 21 countries. We are talking about a region that spans from Egypt all the way to Kazakhstan and Pakistan. It includes Iraq, Iran, Syria, Yemen, and the Central Asian republics. It is a massive piece of geography, and he is the one responsible for every American military movement within those borders. When you think about the budget he manages, it is in the billions. Just one line item in the fiscal year 26 budget for CENTCOM was $14.9 million just for administrative support. The total operational cost of what he is doing right now in Operation Epic Fury is likely in the hundreds of billions.
It is interesting that he is a Navy admiral, though. We talked about this briefly when he took over last August, but CENTCOM has traditionally been an Army or Marine Corps command because the region is so land-heavy. I think the last Navy guy to run it was Admiral William Fallon back in 2008. Why do you think a sailor was the choice for this specific moment in history?
It was a very strategic move by the administration. If you look at Cooper's background, he spent years as the commander of the Fifth Fleet. He knows the maritime environment of the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea better than anyone. And when you look at Operation Epic Fury, a huge portion of it is maritime. They have already destroyed 17 Iranian ships as of 2 days ago. Having an admiral at the helm means you have someone who understands how to integrate carrier strike groups, like the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, with naval blockade strategies and land-based strikes. He is thinking about the world in terms of shipping lanes and choke points, which is exactly where the conflict with Iran is centered.
It makes sense, especially given how much of the current conflict involves keeping those shipping lanes open and neutralizing naval threats. But let's get into the layers of command. If I am a private in a foxhole or a sailor on a destroyer, how many people are between me and Admiral Cooper? Because if he is the CEO, he is not talking to the factory floor every day.
It is a lot more than you might think. Usually, there are about 8 to 10 distinct layers of command. Think about it this way. At the very top, you have Cooper at CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa or at the forward headquarters in Qatar. Below him, you have the component commanders. These are usually 3-star or 4-star officers who run the specific service branches within the theater. So you have a commander for all Army forces in the Middle East, which is Arcant. You have one for all Navy forces, NAVC-CNT, one for Air Force, AFCENT, and one for Marines, MARCENT.
Okay, so that is the first layer of delegation. Cooper says, here is the objective. We need to neutralize these 1,700 targets, and then the Air Force commander has to figure out how the Air Force does its part.
Right. And then below that Air Force or Army commander, you might have a Corps or a Task Force commander. Below them, a division commander, who is a 2-star general, then a brigade commander, who is a colonel. Then a battalion commander, a company commander, a platoon leader, and finally the squad leader who is actually talking to that private. By the time an order from Cooper reaches the person pulling the trigger, it has been translated and refined through 10 different levels of leadership.
That seems like it could be a recipe for a massive game of telephone. How does a 4-star commander ensure that his intent actually survives that many layers of bureaucracy? If I tell 10 people a secret, it is a different secret by the end. How does that work with a missile strike?
That is the core of military leadership at scale. It is something called commander's intent. Cooper doesn't tell a sergeant which building to clear. He provides a high-level vision of what the end state needs to look like. He says, we need to neutralize the long-range missile capabilities in this specific province to ensure the safety of our carrier crews. Then his staff and the subordinate commanders build the detailed plans to make that happen. He manages the what and the why, but he leaves the how to the layers below him. It is about trust and standardized training. Every one of those 10 layers has been trained in the same doctrine, so they speak the same language.
It is fascinating to look at the timeline of his last month, too. It really highlights what you call the diplomat-warrior paradox. On February 6th, less than a month ago, Admiral Cooper was in Muscat, Oman. He was participating in indirect negotiations with Iranian officials, trying to find a diplomatic off-ramp. He was essentially acting as a high-level diplomat, trying to prevent the very war he is now leading.
And then 22 days later, on February 28th, he is the one briefing President Trump and Secretary Hegseth on the final strike packages for Operation Epic Fury. He went from the negotiating table to the war room in 3 weeks. That is the reality of being a combatant commander. You have to be able to speak the language of international diplomacy in the morning and then review a target list of 1,700 sites in the afternoon. He is a statesman as much as he is a sailor.
I think that is the part that would surprise people the most. The sheer amount of time these guys spend with heads of state and foreign ministers. He isn't just talking to other soldiers. He is building coalitions. He is managing the relationship with the Israelis, the Saudis, the Emiratis. If he fails at the diplomacy side, the military side becomes 10 times harder because he loses access to bases or overflight rights. If Jordan says no to our jets, the whole plan for Epic Fury has to be rewritten.
If Qatar or Jordan suddenly says, you can't use our airspace, the entire operation grinds to a halt. So Cooper is constantly on a plane or a secure video link maintaining those political foundations. We actually touched on the structure of these global commands back in episode 790, when we looked at the different geographic combatant commands. If listeners want to understand the map better, that is a great one to revisit because it explains how the world is divided into these fiefdoms.
I remember that one. It really helps you realize that the world is essentially carved up into these corporate-style territories for the United States military. But let's talk about the daily grind. When he is in the middle of a massive operation like Epic Fury, what does his actual day look like? Is he just in meetings from sunrise to sunset?
Pretty much, but they are very high-stakes meetings. His day usually starts incredibly early, partly because of the time zone reality. CENTCOM is headquartered in Tampa, Florida, but the action is 8 or 9 hours ahead. When he wakes up at 4 in the morning in Florida, it is already the afternoon in the Middle East. He is immediately stepping into a flow of information that has been happening while he was asleep. He starts with a sitrep, a situation report, which is a condensed version of everything that happened in the last 12 hours.
He must have a massive team just to filter that information for him. No one person can read every report from 21 countries.
He does. It is called the J-Staff. This is a standard structure across the military, but at the CENTCOM level it is huge. You have thousands of people divided into directorates. J1 is personnel who is sick, who is wounded, who is arriving in theater. J2 is intelligence. What is the enemy doing? J3 is operations. What are we doing right now? J4 is logistics. Do we have enough fuel? J5 is plans. What are we doing next month? J6 is communications. J7 is training. J8 is resources and assessments. And J9 handles civil military operations like dealing with local governments and refugees.
So if he needs to know the status of the Iranian Navy, he calls his J2?
Right. The J2 gives him the intelligence briefing. The J3 tells him exactly where the 2 aircraft carriers are and what their strike readiness is. The J4 tells him if they have enough fuel and munitions in theater to sustain the next 72 hours of strikes. His job is to sit at the center of that spider web and make the hard decisions when the different directorates have conflicting needs. For example, intelligence might want to wait 24 hours to gather more data on a target, but operations might want to strike now because the weather window is closing. Cooper is the one who has to break the tie. He is the ultimate arbiter of risk.
And there is a legal layer to this too, right? I was reading about the targeting process for the first wave of Epic Fury. They had judge advocate general officers, basically military lawyers, involved in every single target selection.
Every single one. That is something people don't realize. In a modern, professional military like ours, the commander doesn't just point at a map and say, blow that up. Every target goes through a legal review to ensure it complies with the laws of armed conflict and the specific rules of engagement set by the president. There is a whole kill chain of intelligence analysts, lawyers, and targeteers who vet these things before they ever get to Cooper's desk for final approval. He is signing off on the legality of the war as much as the strategy.
It sounds incredibly bureaucratic, but I suppose that is the only way to manage an operation of this scale without it devolving into chaos. It reminds me of episode 890, where we talked about the mechanics of modern warfare and how much of it is actually logistics and legal preparation rather than just tactical brilliance.
Logistics is everything. If you can't get the parts for a B-2 bomber to a base in the Indian Ocean, that bomber doesn't fly. Cooper spends a huge amount of his time worrying about the boring stuff. The supply chains, the fuel tankers, the medical evacuation routes that makes the exciting stuff possible.
Let's pivot to the physical side of things. This was part of the prompt we wanted to explore. Admiral Cooper is a 4-star admiral. He's in his 60s. Does he still have to do push-ups? Does he have to know how to use a weapon? Or is he purely a brain at this point?
The short answer is yes, he has to do the push-ups. Every single person in the United States military, from the lowest private to the highest 4-star, is subject to physical fitness requirements. Now, the requirements change as you get older. The standards for a 60-year-old are different than for a 20-year-old, but they don't go away. For a Navy admiral like Cooper, he has to pass the Navy Physical Readiness Test. That involves a 1.5-mile run or a swim, planks, and push-ups.
Can you imagine being the 22-year-old sailor who has to grade the 4-star admiral's push-ups? That has to be the most stressful job in the Navy. Sir, your form was a little off on that 45th one.
You better believe they are counting every single one very carefully. But honestly, for guys at that level, fitness is more than just a requirement. It is a leadership signal. If the commander looks sloppy or out of shape, it sends a message to the entire force that standards don't matter. Most of these top generals and admirals are actually fitness fanatics. They are up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning doing intense workouts because it is the only way to manage the stress of the job. It is a discipline thing. If you can't control your own body, how can you control a theater of war?
And what about weapons? I mean, he is a sailor by trade. Does he have to qualify on a pistol or a rifle? I have this image of him with a sidearm in a holster while he is looking at maps.
For a Navy admiral, the weapons qualification requirements are much lighter than they would be for an Army or Marine general. Most senior officers in the Army still have to qualify annually on the M17 pistol or the M4 rifle. For Cooper, he likely hasn't had to fire a weapon in a professional capacity in years, but he would still have the basic training. If he is in a forward area, like the headquarters in Qatar, he is surrounded by a massive security detail anyway. He isn't expected to be the one kicking down doors.
Right. If the CENTCOM commander is forced to use his sidearm, something has gone catastrophically wrong with the entire defense of the theater. We are talking about a total collapse of security.
His weapon is his mind and his ability to communicate intent. But there is a cultural aspect to it. In the military, you are a soldier or a sailor first. Being able to demonstrate that you still understand the fundamentals of the craft matters for your credibility. Even if he isn't a marksman, he needs to understand the capabilities of the weapons his troops are using. He needs to know the difference between what a precision-guided missile can do versus a standard gravity bomb, not just in terms of explosive yield, but in terms of the tactical risk to the pilot. He has to understand the feel of the tools he is employing.
That brings up an interesting point about the red phone myth we mentioned earlier. People think these commanders are making split-second tactical decisions. But in reality, when Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28th, that wasn't a snap decision. How long do you think they were planning those specific strikes?
Months, maybe years. The military has something called O-plans, or operational plans, for almost every conceivable scenario. They have a plan for a conflict with Iran, a plan for a conflict with North Korea, a plan for a humanitarian disaster in the Pacific. These are living documents that are thousands of pages long and are constantly updated by the staff. When the order came from President Trump to execute the strikes, Cooper wasn't starting from scratch. He was pulling a pre-vetted, highly detailed plan off the shelf and making the final adjustments based on the latest intelligence from the J2.
So his role in that moment is more like a conductor of an orchestra. The music is already written, the musicians know their parts, and he is just making sure everyone starts at the right time and stays in sync.
That is a perfect analogy. And the stakes of that synchronization are life and death. We saw that on March 3rd, just 2 days ago, when Cooper gave his update to the White House. He had to report that while the mission was succeeding, they had lost 6 service members with 4 more seriously wounded. That is the weight that sits on his shoulders. Every one of those 1,700 targets represents a risk to American lives. He has to balance the strategic necessity of the strike against the very real human cost. When he looks at a map, he isn't just seeing targets, he is seeing the locations where his people are in danger.
It makes you realize why these guys often look like they have aged 10 years in a 4-year command. The mental load of being responsible for 50,000 people in a combat zone, while also navigating the politics of 21 different countries, is just unimaginable for most civilians. I get stressed out just managing my email inbox.
And don't forget the time zones. We mentioned the Egypt to Pakistan span. CENTCOM covers 5.5 hours of time zones just within its own area of responsibility. When Cooper is talking to a commander in Cairo, it is a different time than when he is talking to a commander in Islamabad. He is essentially living on 3 or 4 different clocks at once. He has to be awake when Washington is awake to report to Secretary Hegseth, but he also has to be awake when the sun is coming up over the Persian Gulf, because that is when the strikes are often happening. It is a recipe for permanent jet lag.
I honestly don't know how they do it without just burning out. Is there a secret to the stamina?
Discipline. It is all about the routine. That is why the physical training and the structured briefings are so important. It provides a skeleton for the day that keeps them from collapsing under the chaos. If you look at Cooper's career, he has been preparing for this since he was a midshipman at the Naval Academy. You don't just wake up one day and become a 4-star admiral. It is a 40-year winnowing process where only the people with the most extreme capacity for work and stress make it to the top.
It is also worth noting how he manages the joint environment. We use that word a lot in military discussions, but it is really the secret sauce of how the United States military operates. Cooper is a Navy guy, but he is commanding Army tank divisions and Air Force bomber wings. How does he speak all those different languages?
That is what the Goldwater-Nichols Act was really trying to solve back in '86. Before that, the services didn't play well together. They each had their own plans and their own radios that didn't talk to each other. It was a disaster in places like Grenada or the failed Iran hostage rescue. Now, to even become a general or an admiral, you have to serve in joint assignments where you work with the other branches. Cooper has spent a huge portion of his career in joint roles, including serving as the deputy commander of CENTCOM before he took the top spot. He knows how the Army thinks, he knows what the Air Force needs, and he knows how to blend them into a single unified force. He is the ultimate integrator.
It really is a feat of organizational engineering. I think for our listeners, the takeaway here is that when you see Admiral Cooper on the news, you shouldn't just see a military guy. You should see a high-level executive, a diplomat, and a strategist who is managing one of the most complex organizations on the planet under the most extreme pressure possible.
And if you want to track how this conflict is going, don't just look at the general news headlines. Look for the CENTCOM updates. Look for the language they use about degrading capabilities versus destroying assets. That language is very specific, and it reflects the deliberate intent of the commander and his staff. If they say they are degrading a missile site, it means it is still there, but it can't function. If they say destroyed, it is gone.
That is a great tip. And actually, if you are interested in the history of how these kinds of alliances come together in the heat of the moment, you should definitely check out episode 696. We talked about the secret air defense alliance that formed in 24 and 25. It gives a lot of context for why certain countries in the region are helping us out right now with Operation Epic Fury, even if they aren't doing it publicly.
Yeah, that episode is very relevant to what is happening over the skies of Iran and Iraq right now. It is all about that pre-approved spontaneity. The work Cooper and his predecessors did months and years in advance so that when the missiles fly, everyone knows their role without having to ask.
So, looking forward, what do you think the legacy of this command will be for Cooper? He is the first Navy guy in this role in nearly 20 years, and he is leading the biggest fight in 20 years.
I think he will be remembered as the man who proved that the Navy can lead a theater that was once thought of as purely an Army domain. If Operation Epic Fury succeeds in its goals of neutralizing the Iranian nuclear and missile threat, it will validate this new model of integrated, maritime-heavy command. But more importantly, it will show the importance of that diplomat-warrior balance. He tried the diplomacy in Oman on February 6th, it didn't work, and he was ready with the hammer on February 28th the moment it was needed. He didn't hesitate.
It is a heavy burden to carry. I don't think I would want his job for a single day, let alone a 4-year tour. The weight of those 6 lives lost on March 3rd alone would be enough to break most people.
Definitely. I will stick to my books and my research, thank you very much, but I have an immense respect for the level of professional excellence it takes to function at that level. It is easy to criticize top brass from the outside as being out of touch, but when you look at the actual mechanics of what they are doing, the legal reviews, the logistics, the diplomacy, it is truly impressive.
Well, I think we have thoroughly demystified the role today, from the push-ups to the Oman negotiations to the 10 layers of command. It is a lot more than just conference calls. It is action at a global scale.
Much more. It is the management of violence in the service of strategy.
Before we wrap up, I want to say a quick thank you to everyone who has been sticking with us through these deeper dives into current events. We know the world feels a bit heavy right now, especially with the news coming out of Iran and the casualties we are seeing. But we believe that understanding the how and the why behind the headlines is the best way to make sense of it all.
Knowledge is the best antidote to anxiety. And if you are finding these episodes helpful, please take a second to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It really does help the show reach more people who are looking for this kind of depth and context.
You can find all of our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today about combatant commands and the mechanics of warfare, at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have a full archive there and a way for you to get in touch if you have questions or topics you want us to explore in the future.
We love hearing from you guys. And thanks to Daniel for usually sending us such great prompts, even though we hijacked the show today to talk about Admiral Cooper. We will probably let him back in the driver's seat for the next one.
We will see. I kind of enjoyed this deep dive, but either way, we will be back soon.
Until next time, this has been My Weird Prompts.
Take care, everyone. Stay curious.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and fall.